I knew something had shifted the moment my son-in-law poured himself a second glass of wine and didn't offer me any. That was a Tuesday in November. Not Thanksgiving yet. That was still 3 weeks away, but close enough that the house already smelled like cinnamon and dried orange peel because my daughter had put a potpourri wreath on the front door. I had bought that wreath. I remember standing in the aisle at Hobby Lobby thinking she would love the little pine cones wired into the ribbon. I was right. She did love it. She just never said so. My name is not important right now. What matters is that I am 64 years old. I spent 31 years as a licensed practical nurse at a hospital in Atlanta, and I own a 3-bedroom house on a quiet street in Marietta, Georgia, that I paid off myself after my husband Leonard passed in 2019. I did not inherit it. I did not win it. I worked double shifts and ate a lot of sandwiches for lunch and kept the heat at 68 degrees every winter so that I could one day say that the house was mine. All mine. My daughter, Therese, moved in 14 months before that November. She called it temporary. She said she and her husband, Owen, just needed to get back on their feet. They had overextended themselves on a lease in a building they couldn't really afford. And when Owen's hours at the contracting company got cut, the math stopped working. I understood that. Life does that sometimes. It slips out from under you when you're not watching. I had been there myself. After Leonard's first hospital stay in 2017 when I was balancing his prescriptions against the electric bill and trying not to let either one go, so I said yes, come stay. Take the big bedroom at the end of the hall, the one with the attached bath. Make yourselves comfortable. What I did not say, because I assumed it went without saying, was, treat this house like you would treat someone else's home. Be grateful. Be present. Don't eat my food and leave me the packaging. Therese is 41. She is beautiful in the way her father was beautiful. Sharp cheekbones, eyes that go very still when she's thinking. When she was young, she used to sit beside me at the kitchen table while I did paperwork and ask me questions about the patients. Not in a morbid way. In a genuinely curious way. What happened to the man in room 12? Did the woman with the broken hip get to go home? She had a tender heart once. I still believe it's in there somewhere. I just haven't seen it in a while. Owen is 43. He has a laugh that fills the room and opinions that fill every other available space. He grew up in a household where his mother did everything and called it love, and somewhere along the way he absorbed that as a personal entitlement rather than an example. I'm not saying he's a bad man. I'm saying he learned a very specific set of lessons and has not unlearned any of them. The first few months were fine. Politey. Therese would cook on Sundays, Owen would take out the trash without being asked, and I would tell myself that this was working. That family was supposed to be this. People leaning on each other when the road got steep. Then, slowly, the texture of things changed. I noticed it first in small ways. The good coffee creamer I bought would be gone by Wednesday when I hadn't had more than 2 cups. The leftovers I was planning for lunch would disappear overnight. The good dish towels, the ones I'd had for years, started showing up in the bathroom being used to dry hands rather than dishes, getting stained, getting rough. Small things. I told myself, small things didn't matter. Then Owen got a new job. A good one. Project manager at a firm in Buckhead, better salary than before. I was happy for him. I made his favorite dinner the night he told us, chicken and rice with the sauce he liked, and I set the table properly with the cloth napkins. I thought things would ease now. I thought the temporariness would start to show itself the way it had been promised. Instead, things got more comfortable. Not for me. For them. Therese stopped cooking on Sundays. Owen started having his colleagues over on Saturday afternoons. I would come home from my part-time shift at the medical clinic. I still work 2 days a week because I like it and because I need to. And find the living room rearranged and beer bottles on my good coffee table without coasters. I bought coasters specifically because I knew they were coming. The coasters were on the shelf 6 inches away. I said something once. Gently. I said, Owen, would you mind using the coasters? The table belonged to my mother. He looked at me with a kind of patient tolerance that made me feel like a child asking for something unreasonable. He said, sure, of course, sorry about that. And then the next Saturday, there were no coasters and there were rings on the wood. I started spending more time in my bedroom. I told myself it was because I was tired, which was partly true. The grocery situation changed around month 8. I had always done the shopping. It was my house, my kitchen. I knew what I needed and how to stretch a budget. But somehow by that point, I was also buying for 3. And then I was buying for 4. Because Owen started inviting his brother Clifton over for dinner a few times a week. Clifton, who never brought anything. Clifton, who had 2 helpings of everything and then asked if there was dessert. I sat down one Sunday evening and looked at my last 3 months of grocery receipts. I had spent on average $460 a month. Before Therese and Owen moved in, I spent $180. I did not say anything right away. I needed to think about how to say it without it becoming a conflict, without Therese getting that look she gets where her eyes go still, and she becomes very quiet, and then later I feel like I've done something wrong, even though I was the one who brought up a legitimate concern. So I said nothing, and September became October, and October moved toward November, and the Thanksgiving wreath went up on the door. The weekend before Thanksgiving, I made a plan. We had family coming. Therese had invited her father's sister, Aunt Ruth, and Ruth's daughter, my niece Portia, who was driving up from Savannah. I had not seen Portia in almost 2 years. She's 38, teaches middle school, has her mother's steadiness about her. I was glad she was coming. Having her in the house felt like having a window opened. I started cooking 3 days before. I made the cornbread on Monday so it could dry out properly for the dressing. I brined the turkey on Tuesday. I made the sweet potato casserole on Wednesday morning, and the collard greens, and the macaroni and cheese, the real kind, baked, not from a box, and 2 pies, 1 pecan, 1 apple. I cooked from 6 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon on Wednesday alone. I was on my feet for 9 hours in my own kitchen. Wednesday evening, I wiped down the counters and set the dining table. Good tablecloth, the ivory linen one I iron once a year. Leonard's mother's china. Crystal glasses I bought for our 25th anniversary and rarely use because they're too pretty to be casual about. I folded the napkins properly the way my mother taught me, and I stood back and looked at the table and felt proud. The house smelled like everything good, like all the years of care I'd put into it. Thanksgiving morning, I was up at 5:30 to start the turkey. Portia arrived at noon with flowers and a bottle of sparkling cider she knew I preferred over wine. She walked into the kitchen, looked around at everything I'd done, and said, "Auntie, this is incredible." She said it the way people say things when they actually mean them. I felt it in my chest. We sat down at 2 o'clock. Aunt Ruth at one end of the table, Owen at the other because somehow that had become his position, Therese across from Portia, me at the side. I sat at the side of my own table. I set out everything I had made. Turkey, dressing, gravy, green beans, mac and cheese, collards, candied yams, rolls, both pies. Owen made a point of saying the mac and cheese was good, which was the first compliment I had received about cooking from him in several months. Aunt Ruth talked about her drive. Therese talked about a show she and Owen had been watching. Portia talked to me. We cleared the first plates. I got up to get the pie. When I came back, Owen was already on his phone, and Therese was telling Aunt Ruth about a vacation they were thinking about taking. A cruise, she said, to the Bahamas in February. A cruise in February. I thought about my grocery receipts. I served the pie. I ate my slice. And then I heard Owen say to Therese in a voice not quite quiet enough that they should talk about the basement situation soon. I put my fork down. Owen has wanted for the past several months to finish the basement. My basement! He's drawn up plans, talked about a home office and a media room, mentioned contractors whose names I don't know. He has framed this as an investment in the property. What he has not mentioned is asking me. He talks about the basement the way you talk about something that already belongs to you, a renovation you're planning on your own home, a decision already made. I heard him say the basement situation, and I heard the word soon, and I thought about the cruise, and I thought about the grocery receipts, and I thought about the rings on my mother's table, and I picked my fork back up, and I ate the rest of my pie very calmly. Because I've been a nurse for 31 years, and I know how to stay calm when everything inside you is moving very fast. I did not say anything at the table. After dinner, Portia helped me wash the dishes. Aunt Ruth sat in the living room with her feet up, which she had every right to do. Owen watched football. Therese wrapped leftovers with the efficiency of someone managing a kitchen they consider their own, labeling containers with a marker she got from my junk drawer, stacking them in my refrigerator according to her system. Portia stood at the sink beside me, and for a while we didn't talk, just worked, the water running and the dishes clinking, and then she said quietly, "How long has this been going on?" I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Auntie, I've been watching since I got here. You cooked all of this. You set this table, you cleaned up, and you sat on the side." I didn't answer right away. I looked out the kitchen window at the backyard where Leonard had planted a Japanese maple the year before he got sick. It still comes back every spring, that tree, bright red. "Faithful," I said. "It's my house," Portia said. "I know it is." We didn't say anything else about it that night. But I felt something shift in me, standing there at the sink. Like a door I had kept very carefully closed had come slightly open, and light was coming through the crack, and I could either open it the rest of the way or spend the rest of my time in this house trying to hold it shut. I chose to open it. I did not make a scene. I did not call a meeting or write a letter or sit everyone down for a talk. That is not how I operate, and at 64, I know how I operate. The following Monday, I called my attorney. Her name is Adaizi. She's been my attorney since 2014. She handled Leonard's estate, and she does not waste my time. I told her I needed to review some things. She said, "Come in Wednesday." Wednesday morning, I drove to her office in a building off Peachtree with my binder. I keep a household binder with account numbers, insurance policies, property records, everything organized in plastic sleeves, and I sat across from Daisy and I told her the full picture, the 14 months, the grocery receipts, the basement conversation, the no coasters. She listened without interrupting. Then she asked me one question. She said, "Is your name the only name on this property?" I said yes. She said, "Good. Let's keep it that way." We talked for an hour and a half. I left with a list of action items. That afternoon, I went to my bank and I spoke to the branch manager, a woman named Sandra who has known me for 11 years, and I made 3 changes to my accounts that I will not detail here because the details are mine. What I will say is that when I walked out of that bank, I felt lighter than I had in 14 months. The November air was cool and clean, and I stood outside for a moment before getting in the car, and I breezed it in. The following week, I called Therese into the living room. Owen was at work. I had timed it deliberately. I told her I loved her. I said that first because I meant it, and I wanted her to know I meant it before anything else was said. "I love you" was not a preamble. It was the foundation. Then I told her we needed to talk about the arrangement. I told her the house was not a permanent solution. I told her I had done some thinking and some planning, and that I needed them to begin working toward their own place with a real timeline. Not open-ended, not when things feel right, but a real date. I said 18 months. I said I would help them where I reasonably could, but that help had limits, and the limits had not been communicated clearly enough at the start, and that was partly my responsibility. I said there would be no basement renovation. Therese went very quiet in the way I know. Her eyes went still, but this time I did not fill the silence. I waited, and I let her sit with it. After a long moment, she said, "You talked to someone without talking to us first?" I said, "I talked to my attorney about my property. That's not something I need to consult you on." She said, "This feels sudden." I said, "Therese, I cooked for 3 days. I set a table I was not invited to sit at properly. I've been buying groceries for a household of 4 on a retirement income. Nothing about this is sudden. I've been patient. And I want to keep being patient with you because you're my daughter and I love you. But patience without honesty isn't love. It's just avoidance." She started to cry, not in a manipulative way. I know the difference. She cried the way people cry when something they've managed not to look at directly is suddenly right in front of them. I got up and sat beside her and held her hand. I didn't take anything back, but I held her hand. That evening, Therese told Owen. I was not in the room for that conversation, but I could hear the shape of it through the wall. His voice rising, her voice steadying him, the long silence after. At some point, Owen knocked on my bedroom door. I opened it. He stood in the hallway and looked at me with an expression I had not seen on him before. Not the patient tolerance. Something more honest than that. He said, "I didn't realize how much we'd been depending on you." I said, "I know you didn't." He said, "That's not an excuse." I said, "No, it isn't." We stood there for another moment, and then he said, "I'm going to start looking at listings this weekend." And I nodded, and I said, "Good. That's good, Owen." Portia called me the next day. I don't know how she knew. Maybe Therese had called her, or maybe she just knows me, but she called and asked how I was. I said I was fine, better than fine. I was a little tired in the way you're tired after you've done something that needed doing. She said, "Good." She said, "You deserve to eat at the head of your own table." I said, "I think I do." That winter, I started eating breakfast at my dining room table instead of at the kitchen counter. I would sit in the good chair at the head with my coffee and my book and the morning light coming through the front window, and it sounds like such a small thing. It is a small thing, but it didn't feel small. It felt like remembering something I had always known about myself but had put down somewhere and forgotten to pick back up. My house still smells like cinnamon sometimes when I feel like it. I put the potpourri wreath back on the door myself. The Japanese maple in the backyard is already showing the first small buds of the season, red as it always is, faithful as Leonard planted it to be. There is a version of this story where I let it go on, where I told myself it wasn't so bad. It was family. It was temporary. There would be a better time to say something. I know that version well because I almost lived it. I have colleagues who are living it right now, good women who are disappearing quietly into arrangements they agreed to without fully understanding what they were agreeing to. What I understand now is this: love is not the same thing as unlimited availability. Generosity is not the same as silence. And a home is not a home if the person whose name is on the deed doesn't feel she belongs in it. I am 64 years old. I have a property in Marietta, Georgia that I paid off myself. I have a binder with everything in order. I have an attorney named Agaze and a branch manager named Sandra and a niece named Portia who stood at my sink on Thanksgiving and asked the right question. And I have a dining room table that belonged to my mother with a few rings on the wood that will never quite come out. I run my hand over them sometimes. I don't mind them anymore. They remind me of what I allowed for too long and what I finally decided to stop allowing. That's worth keeping. That's worth remembering. Dignity, I have learned, does not announce itself. It doesn't wait for the right moment or the right words or the right audience. It lives quietly inside you, patient and steady, and it asks only one thing, that when the time comes, you choose it. I chose it. A little late, but I chose it, and that is enough. I've been thinking a lot lately about the word temporary. How easily we accept it, how readily we let it stretch. When Therese and Owen moved in, temporary meant a few months, a bridge between one chapter and the next. I understood that. I had lived through my own tight seasons. The years when Leonard was sick and the bills were heavier than the paycheck, and you just put your head down and kept going. I knew what it meant to need a hand. I was glad to be that hand. But somewhere in those 14 months, temporary became something else. It became assumed. It became permanent in all the ways that mattered. In the grocery receipts, in the rearranged furniture, in the way Owen talked about my basement like he was already measuring it. And I let it. That's the part I have to be honest with myself about. I let it because I told myself that love meant not making things difficult. That being a good mother meant being available. That saying nothing was the same as keeping the peace. What I understand now is that silence isn't peace. It's just postponed honesty. And postponed honesty has a cost. It accumulates quietly. The way the rings accumulated on my mother's table, one evening at a time, until the damage is already done. Portia, standing at my sink on Thanksgiving and asking how long this had been going on. That was the moment the door came open. Not because she said anything extraordinary. She just asked a question and waited, and I realized I had no comfortable answer. That discomfort was information. I had been trained as a nurse to pay attention to symptoms, to notice when something in the body is signaling that something is wrong. I had stopped applying that same attention to my own life. What I did next? Calling a Daisy, sitting down with Sandra at the bank, having the conversation with Therese in my living room. None of it felt brave in the moment. It felt necessary. There's a difference. Bravery has a kind of thrill to it. Necessity is quieter. It just means you run out of reasons to keep avoiding the thing that has to be done. Owen, standing in my hallway, saying, "I didn't realize how much we've been depending on you." I believe he meant it. I believe he genuinely had not seen it clearly until that moment. And that, to me, is its own kind of lesson, not about bad people, but about how easy it is for any of us to take without noticing we're taking when the person giving has made it too easy to look away. I am not angry at my daughter. I am not angry at Owen. I am clear-eyed about what happened and clear-eyed about my own part in it. I set a table I wasn't properly invited to sit at, and I set it for 14 months, and I told myself it was love. Maybe parts of it were, but the parts that were silence, the parts that were avoidance, the parts that were me shrinking into my own bedroom in my own house, those weren't love. Those were fear dressed up as patience. What I want anyone to take from this, anyone who is sitting somewhere right now feeling like a guest in their own life, is simply this: the people who love you can still take you for granted. That is not a contradiction. It just means that love, without honesty, without boundaries, without the occasional hard conversation, becomes a habit rather than a choice. And you deserve to be someone's choice, not just their convenience. I eat at the head of my table now, every morning, coffee and a book and the light coming through the front window. It is a small thing. It is everything.